There are stories that seem to linger in the air, like the faint hum of a mystery that refuses to be solved. Stories that feel more like riddles, begging us to look closer, think deeper, and wonder what might really be hiding beneath the surface. The story of Elisa Lam is one of them. It's not just a tragic tale or an unsolved case, it's something more. A mirror, maybe, held up to our own fears, curiosities, and the shadows we often ignore. When Elisa Lam vanished at the infamous Hotel Cecil in Los Angeles, she left behind more than unanswered questions. She left behind a puzzle that continues to haunt the internet, investigators, and truth seekers around the world. At first glance, it looked like a simple missing person case. A young woman, traveling alone, last seen, in a hotel, and nothing. But as details began to surface, strange behavior caught on surveillance footage, a disturbing history linked to the hotel, and circumstances that didn't quite add up, the story turned into something else. Something unsettling. Something we couldn't explain, but also couldn't look away from. What happened to Elisa Lam? And why does her story pull so many of us into its web? Let's go back to the beginning, not just Elisa's arrival at the hotel, but to who she was. Elisa was a 21-year-old Canadian student from Vancouver, curious and introspective, someone who openly wrote about her mental health struggles on her blog. She loved books, poetry, and had a thoughtful way of expressing herself. Like many of us, she was searching for meaning, for peace, maybe even for herself. Her trip to California was meant to be an adventure, a way to break out of the routine, explore the world on her own, and find inspiration. She traveled by Amtrak and bus, visiting San Diego and other cities along the West Coast. Before arriving in Los Angeles on January 26, 2013, that's when she checked into the Hotel Cecil, and that's when things began to unravel. The Hotel Cecil isn't your average hotel. Since its opening in 1927, it's been the backdrop to countless tragedies, suicides, murders, and disappearances. It's even been linked to notorious figures like Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, who lived there during his killing spree. The place seems to breathe a certain darkness, as if its walls remember everything. Tourists often book rooms without knowing the building's grim past. Elisa, like many others, probably didn't know either. She was originally assigned to a shared room, but after complaints from her roommates about her odd behavior, she was moved to a private room. What exactly that behavior was remains unclear, but it was troubling enough to raise concern. Her last known appearance was in a piece of security footage that would soon go viral: elevator surveillance, video dated February 1, 2013. In it, Elisa is seen stepping into the elevator, pressing multiple buttons, peeking out into the hallway nervously, hiding in the corner, and making bizarre hand gestures, as if communicating with someone unseen. Then, she disappears. That footage became the heart of the mystery. Internet users around the world analyzed every second, every gesture, every flicker of movement. Some claimed she was being followed. Others suggested paranormal involvement. Still others pointed to mental illness as a possible explanation. The video raised far more questions than answers, and with no new leads, the case seemed to stall until her body was discovered in the hotel's rooftop water tank on February 19th, after guests complained of low water pressure and strange-tasting tap water. How did she get there? The water tanks were difficult to access, requiring someone to climb a ladder and lift a heavy lid. The door to the roof was locked and alarmed. Was it suicide, an accident, or something else entirely? The official autopsy ruled her death as accidental drowning, with her bipolar disorder cited as a contributing factor. No drugs or alcohol were found in her system, and no signs of trauma or sexual assault were reported. But for many, the explanation didn't satisfy. How could a young woman end up in a sealed water tank, on a locked roof, without anyone noticing? That's when theories began to explode. Some speculated she had been murdered by someone who worked at the hotel and knew how to access the roof without triggering alarms. Others suggested supernatural forces were at play after all. The Hotel Cecil has long been rumored to be cursed. There were even wilder theories: government experiments, alternate dimensions, even possession. But maybe the most disturbing theory is the simplest one: that Elisa was alone in her mind, spiraling into a manic episode, and no one was there to help her. That in a city full of people, she was lost, unheard, and invisible. And maybe that's what truly unsettles us. The idea that someone could be suffering so deeply, so close to others, and yet vanish unnoticed. There's something haunting about watching that elevator footage. It's not just the eerie silence or her erratic movements. It's the raw vulnerability. We're watching someone in distress, someone clearly not okay, and we can't do anything. We don't know what happened before or after. We don't know if she was afraid of someone or something, or if her mind was simply playing tricks on her. The footage became a mirror reflection of our fears, our fascination with the unknown, and our need to make sense of chaos. And then there's the Hotel Cecil itself. Why does this place keep appearing in stories like this? Is it just coincidence, or is there something more? Can a place absorb the energy of pain, fear, and death? Can darkness become part of the foundation, etched into the walls like invisible scars? The more we look into the hotel's history, the more we see a patent tragedy upon tragedy, as if the building itself is cursed. Or maybe, more realistically, it's a magnet for people on the edge, a cheap place in a city that doesn't always offers safety to those who need it most. Elisa's story is not just about what happened to her. It's about how we respond to mystery. Some of us dig for facts. Some of us create theories. Some of us look away, uncomfortable with the unknown. But in the end, the questions remain. What happened in those last moments? Did she know what she was doing? Was someone else involved? Or did the weight of her mind become too much? And what does it say about us that we're still talking about her? Is it empathy, curiosity, or something darker, our obsession with death, with mystery, with things we can't control? What's clear is this. Elisa Lam's story touched a nerve, not because we understand it, but because we don't, because it reminds us that even in a world full of technology, surveillance, and constant connection, someone can still disappear. And maybe that's the real enigma, not the ghost stories or conspiracy theories, but the quiet truth of how fragile a human life can be. In the weeks that followed the discovery of Elisa Lam's body, the questions didn't go away, they multiplied. News outlets covered the story with morbid fascination, and the internet became a hive of speculation. Reddit threads grew into digital investigations. YouTubers, bloggers, and amateur detectives dissected every frame of the elevator video, every sentence in the autopsy report, and every photo of the hotel rooftop. It wasn't just curiosities, it was obsession. But why? Maybe because we all felt like something wasn't right. The official story seemed too simple, too neat for something that felt so disturbing. And when things don't add up, our minds naturally fill the gaps. We're hardwired for stories, for explanations, and when we don't get them, we create them. Some people focused on the technical details. They questioned how Elisa could have reached the water tank without setting off alarms. The door to the roof was supposedly locked, with a security system that should have gone off if someone opened it. Yet no alarm was reported. Was it malfunctioning? Was someone with access helping her or hurting her? Others turned their attention to the tank itself. It was tall, with no built-in ladder inside, and the lid was heavy. How could she have climbed in, closed the lid behind her, and then drowned, all by herself? The maintenance workers who discovered her body said the lid was open when they found her, but later reports said the lid had been closed. These inconsistencies only fueled more suspicion. Was it an honest mistake, or was something being covered up? There were also strange coincidences that kept piling up. For example, during the same time Elisa disappeared, the Los Angeles area experienced a tuberculosis outbreak, particularly among the homeless population in Skid Row, just blocks away from the Hotel Cecil. The name of the tuberculosis tests used by the Lam Elisa tests. To conspiracy theorists, this was too bizarre to ignore. Was Elisa involved in some kind of experiment? Was her death a message or These theories, of course, often stretched reality, but they reflected a deep discomfort with the idea that someone could vanish, die, and be left in a water tank for weeks without anyone noticing. So we searched for meaning. Some people believed she was stalked or attacked. Others believed her behavior in the elevator showed signs of possession or a ghostly presence. There were even connections made to Korean horror films, claiming the footage resembled scenes from supernatural movies. But what if the truth was less cinematic and more human? Many experts pointed out that Elisa's behavior in the video was consistent with a mental health episode. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, and had been prescribed multiple medications to manage her condition. The toxicology report, while not conclusive, suggested that she may have stopped taking some of her medication. Her behavior hiding in the elevator, appearing disoriented, making unusual hand movements could be the result of a manic or psychotic episode. But that explanation, while plausible, felt incomplete to many. It didn't explain the inconsistencies around the rooftop access or the lid of the tank. It didn't explain why no one heard or saw anything. It didn't explain the timing, the symbolism, or the eerie feeling people got from watching the video. The truth might be simple, but the atmosphere surrounding the case was anything but. And then there's the role of the Hotel Cecil itself. Once you start digging into its history, it's hard not to feel the weight of all that came before. The building has been associated with at least 16 deaths, including suicides and murders. In the 1980s, Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, lived there during his spree of killings and assaults. He would return to the hotel after his crimes, often throwing his bloody clothes into the dumpster behind the building, and walking through the lobby in nothing but his underwear. After him, another serial killer, Jack also stayed at the Cecil in the 1990s. He murdered multiple women in Los Angeles during his stay. The pattern became difficult to ignore. It was as if the hotel wasn't just a backdrop, but an active participant in the darkness. The Cecil developed a reputation as a place where bad things happened, a place that drew in people on the edge. This reputation grew even more over time. Paranormal investigators began to visit the site. Ghost hunters claimed to feel strange energy. Guests reported unexplained noises, feelings of dread, and strange encounters. Was it just the power of suggestion? or was there something real behind it? When Elisa Lam's story became public, many people tied it to the hotel's dark legacy. They wondered if she had sensed something in that place, some kind of oppressive energy, something that pushed her over the edge. It's easy to dismiss such ideas as superstition, but anyone who's walked into an old, storied building knows how a place can feel alive in ways we don't fully understand. As more people explored the case, the narrative began to shift. No longer just a true crime mystery, Elisa's story became a cultural phenomenon. It was the subject of documentaries, podcasts, books, and countless online debates. Her story resonated with a generation that grew up in the digital age, one where we feel close to people we've never met, where we watch videos of strangers and try to piece together their lives. Elisa's blog posts, once quiet reflections shared with a small audience, were suddenly being read by millions. Her words, often poetic and thoughtful, revealed a young woman struggling to understand herself and the world. She wrote about feeling lost, about wanting to connect, about the tension between wanting to be alone and wanting to be understood. These writings made her real to us, not just a name and a headline, but a person with dreams, fears, and hopes. And maybe that's why her story sticks with us, because it could have been any of us. A solo traveler, a young person wrestling with mental health, someone searching for meaning in a noisy world. We see parts of ourselves in her. We wonder if we would have noticed if we had been there. We wonder what we would have done. Would we have seen her pain? Could we have helped? This reflection turns the mystery inward. Instead of asking only what happened to her, we start asking, how do we care for people like her? How do we make sure that those who are struggling aren't left alone in the dark? How do we build a society that sees people really, sees them before it's too late? Elisa's death became more than a headline. It became a symbol, a reminder of how easily someone can fall through the cracks. And in trying to understand what happened, we are also trying to make sense of our own world. A world that can be cold and overwhelming. A world where places like the Hotel Cecil exist, places that reflect our fears back to us. The online community's obsession with solving the mystery was, in many ways, an attempt to take back control. When life feels chaotic, when the world doesn't make sense, solving a puzzle can feel like restoring order. But this case resists resolution. Every answer leads to more questions. Every theory opens new doors. And maybe that's the point. In a way, Elisa's story became a modern myth, a tale, passed around, analyzed, not because we want to exploit it, but because we're trying to find meaning in a senseless tragedy. And as with all myths, it tells us more about ourselves than about the subject. It tells us about our need for connection, our fear of the unknown, and our struggle to face the fragility of the human mind. When we watch that elevator video, we're not just watching Elisa, we're watching our own discomfort, our own questions. Why are we so drawn to darkness? Why do we crave answers so badly? And why, despite all our searching, do some mysteries remain unsolved? As time passed, the memory of Elisa Lam continued to echo across the internet, not fading like many other stories do, but instead transforming. The obsession evolved. It became less about solving the mystery and more about interpreting it, about what it meant, what it revealed, and how it made people feel. Her story became a canvas on which countless people projected their fears, their questions, and their grief. And in this strange, shared space of digital mourning and mystery, Elisa became something more than a name. She became a symbol of something deeper that society hadn't quite put into words yet. It's tempting to believe we can reach closure with a story like this, that one day we'll get the definitive answer, the neat conclusion, the missing piece, that will suddenly make it all make sense. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe this story stays open on purpose, because what we're really wrestling with isn't just the logistics of a tragic death, but the atmosphere around it, the tension between reality and imagination, between science and spirit, between fact and feeling. There's a reason why the Elisa Lam case feels different. It touches multiple threads at once: mental health, urban loneliness, digital view, and society's uneasy relationship with suffering. Her death happened at the intersection of old-world horror and modern technology, a haunted hotel from the 1920s, and a viral video that spread across global platforms. It's no wonder that the case became mythic. It speaks to something primal in us: fear of being alone, of being misunderstood, of disappearing without anyone noticing. Many of the theories that surround the case say more about our collective anxieties than about the case itself. The supernatural explanations reflect a fear of places that absorb darkness and project it back. The conspiracy theories reveal our deep mistrusts of institutions and official narratives. And the psychological interpretations highlight our growing awareness and ease about mental health, about how hard it is to navigate the world when your own mind becomes a maze. In this way, Elisa's story becomes a mirror. Every person who encounters it sees something slightly different. For some, it's about the failures of the system, how mental health is still so misunderstood and For others, it's about how dangerous isolation can be in a city that never stops moving. And for still others, it's about the invisible weight so many people carry behind the smile they show to the world. But perhaps the most unsettling layer is how the public responded. The way the internet dissected Elisa's behavior, her words, her body language, and even her private thoughts. Her Tumblr posts, which were personal reflections and inner monologues, became evidence in an investigation conducted by millions of strangers. Some people meant well trying to piece together her state of mind or her movements, but others crossed lines. They made wild accusations, mocked her, or used her image for clicks and views. It raises uncomfortable questions about what we do with someone's story. Once it's no longer theirs to tell. We live in a time when privacy can dissolve in an instant, where a single video clip can turn someone into a viral phenomenon without their consent. Elisa never knew she'd become world, that people would scrutinize her last known moments endlessly, or that her name would be forever tied to mystery. Would she have wanted that? Could any of us imagine what it would feel like to be turned into a symbol, to have strangers all over the world decide what your story means? This brings up a deeper issue, the ethics of mystery. We are drawn to the unexplained, to unsolved cases, and spooky stories. But at what cost? When does curiosity become exploitation? When does storytelling turn into sense? And how do we honor a life while still acknowledging the fascination that surrounds its end? These questions don't have easy answers. But maybe the starting point is to remember that Elisa Lam was not just a mystery, she was a person. A daughter, a friend, a student, someone who loved literature, who wrote about her struggles and joys, who wanted to see the world. When we talk about her, we should do so with care. Not just as a character in a story, but as a human being who deserved help, understanding, and peace. The digital age has changed the way we experience stories like Elisa's in the past. Such a tragedy might have stayed local, covered briefly, and then forgotten. But now, everything is global. A security video gets uploaded, and suddenly the world is watching. We analyze pixels. We zoom in, we slow things down, we look for clues, and in doing so, we sometimes forget the emotional reality behind the footage. We turn pain into puzzles, suffering into entertainment. Not because we're cruel, but because we're overwhelmed. Trying to make sense of chaos is a way of coping. Trying to solve the unsolvable gives us a sense of power in a world that often feels out of control. But there's another way to respond, one that's quieter, slower, and perhaps more meaningful. We can sit with the discomfort. We can allow the story to remain incomplete. We can acknowledge the mystery without needing to own it, and we can let that inspire compassion for Eliza and for others who walk through the world feeling unseen. The Hotel Cecil itself has become a character in this ongoing narrative. Its walls echo with the weight of its past. Some say places like that attract darkness. Others say they are just the backdrop, and the real stories come from the people inside. Either way, the Cecil stands as a symbol of the in-between, between safety and danger, life and death, known and unknown. It's no wonder so many stories have ended or begun. It's a place that reflects back whatever you bring into it. There's something poetic about Elisa's journey leading her there. A young woman searching for meaning, exploring the world on her own, and ending up in a place full of ghosts, literal or metaphorical. Maybe she sensed something. Maybe it was just chance. Maybe it was the city itself, with all its contradictions, that drew her in. Los Angeles is often described as a place of dreams and nightmares, where fantasy and reality blur. And in many ways, that's the perfect setting for Elisa's story. She came seeking adventure and inspiration, and found something else entirely. Her experience captures that strange Tinchina world full of beauty and danger, connection and isolation, light and shadow. As we continue to talk about her, it's important that we also talk about what her story reveals about us, about how we respond to people in crisis, about how we treat mystery, about how we engage with stories online. Elisa's death may always remain partly unexplained, but her life and the impact it had can still teach us something. She reminded us that people are not puzzles to be solved, that mental health matters, that kindness matters, and that every person carries a world inside them, often invisible to others. In the years that followed Elisa Lam's death, her story remained an ever-present echo on the internet. New generations discovered her case, documentaries reignited interest, social media reshared the elevator footage with fresh theories and emotional takes. But something had shifted. The tone, over time, became less about solving her and more about understanding. Understanding the weight of her experience, the complexity of her mental state, and the fragility that threads through so many people's lives. The public started to realize that Elisa wasn't a character in a horror film. She was someone who deserved safety, support, and compassion, something many people around the world still struggle to find. In 2021, a documentary series brought the case back into the spotlight. It attempted to separate the myth from the reality, to reframe the conversation around Elisa's mental health rather than the supernatural or and while not everyone agreed with its conclusions, the effort mattered. It represented a cultural shift from morbid fascination to empathy, from viral mystery to human story, because no matter how strange the circumstances, no matter how many clues or theories we entertain, the heart of the story remains the same. A young woman lost in a system that failed to protect her, in a world that didn't fully see her, and still, the mystery lingers. Because part of us doesn't want to let it go. There's a tension between acceptance and doubt, between believing the official narrative and sensing something more. We wonder, was there someone else involved? Could more have been done? Was there a cry for help we missed? These are the questions we don't ask out loud, but they stay with us. Elisa's story continues to touch people because it reminds us of the limits of our understanding. We want answers, clean endings, a final chapter that explains everything. But real life isn't like that. Life is messy. Mental illness doesn't follow a script. Tragedy often happens in the silence between moments, in places no camera captures, in the hidden rooms of the mind. And when we reach those edges where logic fades and empathy begins, that's when we grow. The Hotel Cecil, after being shut down for years, was eventually renovated and reopened under a different name. But for many, its identity is set. It's become a symbol, not just of urban decay or true crime legends, but of all the things society tries to ignore. The unhoused, the mentally ill, the lonely. In a strange way, Elisa's death forced the world to look at this place and everything it represents. It became a kind of spotlight, illuminating what was hidden in the shadows. And maybe that's part of her legacy too. What we do with that spotlight is up to us. We can keep consuming these stories like ghost tales, collecting details and building elaborate theories. Or we can pause and think about the people behind the headlines, about what they needed, about who they were. That shift from detective to witness, from solver to listener can be powerful. It can change how we respond to the next Elisa, and the one after that. Because there will be others, people struggling quietly, people whose signals go unnoticed, people who disappear long before their bodies are found. And we have a choice, every time, to look closer, to care more, to speak less, and listen deeper, to make room in the world for all kinds of minds. Elisa once wrote in her blog that she felt like she was in the middle of a book, and no one had told her how it would end. That line stays with many who read it, not just because of its poetic sadness, but because it's something we've all felt. That sense of drifting, of not knowing how our story will turn, and in that moment of connection, we realize that Elisa's story isn't just hers, it belongs to all of us. Not in the sense that we own it, but in the sense that we carry it. We carry the questions it asks, the discomfort it stirs, the compassion it requires, and so, maybe the final chapter doesn't need to be about resolution. Maybe it can be about presence, about choosing to see people before they vanish, about remembering that behind every mystery is a life, and behind every life, a soul trying to be heard. The truth about Elisa Lam may never be fully known, but the impact of her story, that quiet, persistent resonance, will remain. And in that space between certainty and mystery, we find something real, something that asks us not to turn away, not to forget, but to care just a little more than we did before. Let her story be more than a riddle. Let it be a reminder that even the softest voice matters, that every story, no matter how brief, has meaning, and that somewhere in the space between mystery and memory, we can find ourselves,